Good evening, 7:02 p.m. On the 27th of March, the Washington Township Historical Society meeting. I would welcome everyone that's here. We had over 20 people on Zooming in for this meeting. And in order to expedite the process,
I don't know.
I can, because we got some very new faces here, but if everyone in the room could introduce themselves, and then we can talk. I'll introduce Victor Wong and his presentation on the birthing of Niles. So here.
Yes. I'm Lena Z. I've been living here in Fremont. Teenager.
Meeting?
Sponsored by
Oh, I get a report. Well, then you have to leave the meeting.
A few years ago, I met Dr. Victor Wong at the Center for the Presbyterian Church. I'm a real estate lady. Some familiar faces.
Thank you.
My name is Karen Korea, longtime resident of the Bay Area.
Frank, living in Fremont for 30 years. And it looks like I'm like a boy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Dave Curry. I've been here all my life. Before that.
And his family had the Turner store on Mission Boulevard and building I now on the property which I rebuilt the building
Right.
across from the Mission.
I'm Suzanne Turner, I'm David's wife, and I lived here since I was 5.
Oh.
Now I'm 82. We moved to Niles all our life. Oh, I'm with on and it's my husband Al. And I've been here pretty much all my life.
No, you've been here in Fremont.
Missed
since-
the call.
Bay Area your whole life. I'm Al Menard. I came to work here at General Motors in '67, and I've basically lived and worked here in Fremont ever since then.
My name is Jen, and pretty new here. I have been here since 2011. Yeah, so 12 years here, and I'm architect. Yeah. By the way, I'm not genetic. Yes. Yeah. You know, I really interested in history. Yeah. That's why we was her. Yeah. I still meet with everyone here.
Yes. I'm Janet Barton, and I'm making a plug for the Chinese History Project, which is a subcommittee for the Washington Township Museum of Local History, and also involved in the Bunkhouse Project over at Shin Park, which is how we know Jen. It's because
I'm interested to bring it back to for people to visit again. I hope.
yes,
Yeah.
right. So if anyone wants to join us for looking for the bunkhouse or for researching Chinese history, Victor's often with us. So we're very happy to have him join the group. And, yeah, really excited to do this.
Thank you.
I am Lisa Chan. We have lived in Fremont for 20 years. And we raised 2 kids here. I'm 24 and he's 19.
And push Zoom.
For rehabilitation.
I'm Robert, this is Blake, also lived here, we've lived here for 20 years.
As they listen to recordings of Steve's music, Joni says Naomi saved part of her soul.
When time does what it will, that music will always be with me.
That was Irvington moved to Niles around 2019, I guess it was.
Thank you.
There's a Bradley, California native, or Bay Area native, and came to Niles and about, what was it, about 94, I think it was. And I also worked on part of the
Niles is in Niles.
Thank you.
My name is Don Rowe Alpha, that's Greek letters. I was born in Wyoming. I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey in Menlo Park for 38 years. I've been Greek for Dr. Wong and I live. I've been there 8 years. And I'm just in I'm his driver.
And you have a Niles Canyon Railroad.
Yeah, well, on the back of, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Tim?
I can't see.
Anything you want to jump to? Tim Swinson, introduce yourself.
My name's Tim. I'm secretary of the Washington Township Civil Society, secretary.
Perpetual Youth. I'm John Weed. I'm president of the organization and have properties in Niles and Mission San Jose. So tonight we have the good fortune of having Victor Wong, who had a background in physics and somehow Back to the Future has gone into history and documenting the Chinese camps in particular in the area, as well as the birthing of Niles and the railroad, which is much of the history. But Victor was born in San Francisco, Chinatown, the youngest of 8 siblings, lived in a small apartment with the bathroom community toilet down the hall, traditional San Francisco housing. Worked at a grocery store and summer jobs to get into college, went to UC Berkeley, commuting from San Francisco. I think those are the days before BART.
Yes.
Made it even more interesting. He went on to get his BS in Bachelor of Science in Engineering Physics with an honorable mention to the University Medal and a PhD in Physics. After a 2-year postdoc at Ohio State, Victor began his 44-year tenure at the University of Michigan as a lecturer, and that's in Ann Arbor. So I tell you my Ann Arbor stories on the side. He received a steady flow of promotions at the Dearborn and Flint campuses, professors of physics, chair of natural sciences, dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Letters, and provost, vice chancellor affairs before returning to Ann Arbor, which was the big campus. Victor is probably one of the few people who have told the President of the United States no and got away with it, and you'll have to explain that in your preliminary introduction. Victor and Nancy returned to California to be close to their 3 daughters and found their place at the Acacia Creek. He continues to share his welcoming spirit and talents by giving talks on the Transcontinental Railroad, black holes, Chinatown, and serving on the Finance Committee. And maybe I'll talk to you about the vortex in Niles, because we're looking for some scientific explanation. So, Victor, do you have any, first of all, comments before you go into your presentation?
Well, I want to thank Martha Crow for that bio that you just read. So,
And how did you tell the president no?
well, that was he wanted to speak on our campus, and I told him that no, he cannot speak where he wanted to speak, and that's what no. So,
Which the president was this?
there was Bill Clinton.
Oh, okay.
This is the October of 1994, during the off-year elections. It was not an invited talk. It was a talk in which he wanted to come on to give a political speech, you might say.
Okay.
And so I thought academics came before politics, and so that's why I said no. Anyway, shall I begin the talk?
Yes.
Now I'm hearing an echo, and I just wonder whether that's okay or not.
We just had a call from one of our viewers, and so Tim is seeing if this is, I think we're getting already getting our critics.
I think it's from his Okay.
I think we're fine. Okay, well, thank you. Well, Victor, let me let you make your presentation. If you'd like us to dim the lights, tell us when we should.
It depends whether you can see the screen or not. If you can see the screen with the lights on, that's fine. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, we'll be talking about the Chinese iron role builders and the birth of Niles today. And I hope that everyone can see the screen okay and have the sound all right, because I'll play a little clip later on. And I hope that that would be all right. If you have any questions for me after the meeting and you don't get a chance to ask it during the meeting, my email is right down there on the bottom there. It's vkw@umich.edu. So today we're going to try to answer the question, how did the Chinese iron role builders lay the foundations for Nile? But before that, we have to say, who were the Chinese builders of iron roads? Who were they? And then we'll look into the local leg of the first transcontinental railroad. And then we'll look at the last leg of the Niles Junction in the valley. And that was the thing that produced Niles. And all this is during the time period of 1865 to 1870. So who were the builders of the iron roads? Well, the first one to notice was this gentleman, and his name was William Spear, and he was known as the champion of the Chinese in California. And back in January of 1855, before any railroads were completed in California, he wrote, "The boundless plateau of the western half of this continent will be scattered by busy lines of Chinese builders of iron roads that shall link the two oceans and add to the wealth and the comforts of the dwellers of either shores." And that was an amazing prophetic words, you might say. And the question is, how did he know? What manner and how did he know? Well, during the gold rush, he was in Canton, the home of the Chinese builders and the capital of Guangdong. Now, Guangdong is this little red part in the southern part of China. It's a subtropical part of China. You can think of it as Louisiana because it has a delta, like the Louisiana has a big delta. And here's the delta. There's the Pearl River Delta. The Pearl River runs through here. It's guarded by two colonies back then, the British colony of Hong Kong and the Portuguese colony of Macau. And there's Canton, Guangzhou now. And the Chinese builders did not come from any of those big cities. Rather, they came from the rural districts of the Pearl River Delta. And namely these three districts here, the four districts lined up here, and then this one over here, Zhongshan. So that makes 5 districts, and these were all rural districts. And so the Chinese builders were villagers from the Pearl River Delta. And they were deeply rooted in their villages. In fact, when you go to the ancestral halls, you will find that some of them would be there for tens of generations. They spoke village variant of Cantonese, not the urbane version of Cantonese, but some village version, and some are mutually unintelligible. And there were hard workers who persevere, mainly because of the environment, because double cropping wasn't possible in the Pearl River Delta, and that led to some hardships. And those who left were committed to those family that they left behind, and they seeded all the 19th century Chinatowns throughout the world. So those are amazing generations of people that came out from the Pearl River Delta. Now, the same year that Spear mentioned his prophetic words, Lim Le Hong started his journey from the Pearl River Delta. And he left Hoi Ping, which is that in the four district area at age 12. And then he was hired by Central Pacific. And then he retired in San Francisco, that is retired from railroad and raised meat products on the ranch in the Potrero district. I'll try to play a video now of that comes from, there we go. Can you hear that?
I was 12 years old when I jumped on a junk headed to Gum San, Gold Mountain. The family was struggling, and since I'm the oldest, I left my village to find work so that I could send money home. It took 6 months.
We have some audio issues that we'll try to address.
Okay, maybe let me forward this and move on. Okay, is the audio all right now? Essentially, what you would have heard is the story of how he worked for the Central Pacific and helped build the railroad across the Sierras, and then later on he settled in San Francisco. Now that was the big epic story that we're familiar with about the Chinese railroaders. And so today we're going to talk about the local situation, and we're looking at just the first transcontinental railroad from Sacramento to the Pacific. And in particular, we're going to focus a little bit on the San Jose Junction in the canyon. And the picture that you see there is the picture that we'll talk about later of the San Jose Junction.
I got it on my phone.
Okay, I hear some feedback there.
Thing about the history of Niles, essentially. Chance on already.
So we'll start with San Francisco and San Jose Railroad, because San Francisco is sort of the heart of our local Bay Area. They started the railroad in 61. They completed in 1864. And now that's Caltrain. And then at the same time, Western Pacific wanted to build from San Jose through Niles Canyon, or Alameda Canyon, it was called then, to Stockton. So the route that they wanted to take is up through here to Stockton and then up to Sacramento. And we'll focus on Alameda County, Canyon today. But the important thing to remember is that in 1865, President Lincoln greenlighted the Western Pacific to build from San Jose to Sacramento. And the reason why that is important is because when they build 20 miles of railroad, then they qualify for federal aid. And and the federal aid was quite considerable. So Jerome Cox was the contractor, and in June of 1865, they entered the canyon. So they started down in San Jose and they built up this way, and then they entered the canyon right here. And this is the 20-mile mark from San Jose. So I'll always use a circle to indicate where the 20-mile mark is. The Cox gang, that is the group of Chinese builders that worked for him, was about 500 Chinese strong, and maybe might even up to 900. They were paid about $30 a month, $1 a day, you might say, but they had to also pay for their own board. whereas the white workers were paid more than $30 a month and had board included. And the hardest part was the grading. And grading means trying to get the 20-foot wide roadbed ready for the tracks. And that they did by hand through the canyon. And they also erected 3 bridges on stone piers. So when they got to the 20-mile mark, and here you see the picture of folks looking at the retaining wall, this retaining wall that the Cox gang built. And when they got to the 20-mile mark, Cox stopped the work and abandoned the workers because he had run out of money. So here in the Middle Canyon, they ran out of money. It turns out that more than a year after that, I found in the Sacramento Daily Union this article about Ying et al. Versus J.P. Cox et al., in which it says that to recover for labor furnished to the Western Pacific Railroad Company, the jury returned a verdict against the defendant Cox and Arnold for $64,434.71. That is an enormous amount of money. It was a class action lawsuit for about 2,000 man-months of back pay. And Ying were brokers for the Chinese builders. In other words, he was the one that was able to hire the Chinese to work for Cox, who was the contractor for Western Pacific. And how did he win the class action lawsuit in front of a white jury? I don't know that. And I don't know whether the Cox gang ever got paid for the work on the heaviest part in the canyon. And that's part of the open questions that we still have on this important part of the railroad that we have in the canyon. So these fellows got paid, and these are the associates of the Central Pacific. And they stepped in, and in June of 1867, Stanford led the Central Pacific to bail out Western Pacific and diverted its assets to the high Sierras to help them build through the Sierra. In October of that same year, they formed Contract and Finance Company, a subsidiary with kickbacks to the 5 associates. You're going to see Contract and Finance coming into Niles when we get to Niles, so remember that. In February of the next year, 1868, then Contract and Finance made a contract with Turton, Knox, and Ryan to resume building the Western Pacific from the Sacramento end. And Ryan supervised the contract builders, so I'm going to call the Ryan gang as the second one. And in April of that same year, Stanford then negotiated a compromise with the mayor of Oakland at the time, Samuel Merritt, to gain Oakland Point as the western terminus of the Pacific Railroad, and thus rerouting the main line to the San Francisco Bay. And the big event, of course, was on May 10th, 1869 at Promontory Summit, where they completed the Pacific Railroad from the Missouri River to Sacramento. But there's still one leg left. And so 2 weeks after that, Stanford himself hired his construction ace, James Strobridge, to finish the key local leg to San Francisco Bay. So this is the makeover that was led by Stanford, and therefore this part of the railroad was known as the Governor's Road. And so now we're ready to go back into the canyon and resume work. So this is now June of 1869. It's 4 years after Cox started entering the canyon in June of 65. And the first thing that happened was that the Ryan gang continued eastward from where the Cox stopped. And so that's the 20-mile mark right here, the circle again. And meanwhile, the Strobridge gang started here at the San Jose Junction, and they started a new main line westward towards Oakland and Alameda. And so what the Strobridge gang did was to follow the flume that supplied Vallejo Mills. And it came from a dam around here. And they had a flume carrying the water down to Vallejo Mill to power the mills. So now we're gonna take two unique views, I would say, of the San Jose Junction. The San Jose Junction is here. You see, this is where the railroad splits. This is the one that Cox built with the first bridge and the Dresser Bridge, second bridge. So this is built by Cox, and then this part was built by Strobridge in 69. We're going to take two views of this. One view is the view of the first bridge from the north hill here, looking south. And then the second view is from the bridge itself, looking east, right into the San Jose Junction. So this is the first picture, and I want to thank Janet for bringing this to my attention. She was the one that found it. And we're looking south towards the Vargas Plateau. And here the first thing you see is the first bridge right there, just gorgeous. As they said in the literature back then, they call it light, strong, and elegant as a work of art. And it's no longer there. What remains there is, well, before I talk about that, here's the flume, the white part here, and Vallejo Mills to the right. And what is left now is this bed here, not the track. The tracks are, of course, newer tracks, and the older ones back in 1869, excuse me, was done by Strobridge, and the new tracks then are the ones that Niles Canyon Railway would run on, I should say. The other view is this one of San Jose Junction. And now we're looking from the first bridge. And this train that you see here is on the San Jose branch that is heading towards San Jose. And the main line is the one that's back against the hill here. And the Dresser Bridge is hidden right by this ridge. And this part here, that's the abutment for the first bridge. We're gonna just zoom into this picture a little bit more. And you can see logs right down there in between the two tracks. This is the San Jose branch that you can see. The main line, you can't see the tracks, but the tracks are right behind these logs that are laid out there. And the logs are for the wood burning locomotive. And then you see the smoke over here, and we think that that's probably another locomotive, and it's probably pulling this set of freight cars that you see just the top of, and they're going eastward. So this one's going eastward, and this one is going southward. And in September 6, 1869, and that's the red letter day, because that was the day that the first through train then left Sacramento and got to Alameda, and the first one to do that. And the train had 16 cars and 3 locomotives on it. And at the San Jose Junction, one switched south to San Jose, and the rest continued to Alameda. And so later on that month, in September 28th, the associates then had a big banquet, and the pronouncement was that the last rail of the iron track that unites the water of the Atlantic with those of San Francisco Bay has been laid. So the Pacific Railroad that President Lincoln green-lighted is done, or was done, on September 6, 1869. But Niles is still yet to come. This is just a plaque in Alameda that tells you about all this. So we now need to focus on this last leg to form the Niles Junction. And this is the cutoff to San Jose. And as it turns out, this picture here, the train is on the cutoff to San Jose, and we'll look at this picture a little bit more later on to see the context of that. So to remind ourselves of the San Jose Junction, in September 6th, the train came this way, and then part of the train switched off and went south to San Jose, and then the rest of the train then went on to Alameda. But this canyon here is so restrictive, this junction really couldn't serve as a junction for the railroad. You can't turn a locomotive around. There's not enough room to do anything. So they knew early on that they need to move this. And so back in July of 69, this describes it, that the Y formed by the branch to San Jose and that to Oakland. Well, this one's the one to Oakland, and this is the one to San Jose. So this is the Y laid on the side, you might say. We converted to a triangle by a short track westward of the mills. Well, Vallejo Mills is right here, so this is the track that they would need to lay. And then that means there'll be a new junction here in the valley. Now to see that new junction, I'll go to a different map. This is the 1874 map, which is located here in the museum. And to remind ourselves, this part was finished in September of 66, 3 years, 3 years later, excuse me, in September 69, then Strobridge does this part. And now the important thing is that in October of 1869, they finished grading this. And once they finished grading that, this triangular part that I'm looking at was platted by Plutarco Vallejo, the son of J&J Vallejo, the owner of the mill. The Vallejo mill is right around there. And so he did that. And 2 weeks later, Contract and Finance Company, that's the subsidiary of Central Pacific, they bought this land. This land wasn't platted until 1884, but they bought this land. They both can see that this junction is going to be very important, and that settlement will certainly come from that. So the significance of just grading this is that it led to both sides being put in place, ready for settlement, and that this then means that the graders then lay the foundation for the arteries to for the settlement of Niles and the rest of Washington Township. So now we go into the change of the name. It turns out that even though the San Jose Junction was in the canyon, it was known as Vallejo Mills because that's the only thing that was close to it. It was a mile away, and it was nowhere close to the canyon, in the junction in the canyon. So in sometime, we don't know exactly when, Central Pacific renamed the station as Niles after the Nevada County Judge Addison Cook Niles. He later on became an associate justice on the Supreme Court. The earliest date that I could find that the word Niles was used for this railroad station was in December of 1869. But when it was really renamed, doesn't matter for the birthday of Niles, because all this renaming did was to change the name on the railroad timetables and the sign in this canyon. So you look at the sign in the canyon, all you did was to replace it with Niles. So we have to wait until something else happens. And in January of 1870, the Sacramento Daily Union then said the new cutoff to San Jose and the new junction near Vallejo Mills was nearly ready for operation. And I discovered this actually during the pandemic, and that was a good time for me to do some research on this, because we were stuck in our apartments, and wait, month after month, just nothing showed up. And Central Pacific just didn't do the switchover until finally in April, I found this brief note. It says the station known heretofore as San Jose Junction and will no longer be a stopping place for the trains either way. Passenger for the San Jose will change cars at Niles. And the San Jose Mercury News also carried a similar notice the day after. So this short little sentence from the newspaper is the birth certificate for Niles, because right after that, immediately after that, the news station and junction became Niles, was called Niles, became operational. The San Jose Junction was decommissioned. The first bridge to San Jose Junction and the southern approach were later abandoned. Within months, Niles had a depot with a restaurant and saloon for passengers transferring from San Jose to the mainline overland, and the depot was located right here in between the track that goes to Sacramento and the track that went on to San Jose. And within years, they had a freight house. That's this part here. They had a roundhouse and a turntable, so they can turn the trains around. Also then, this part came to life. This is the part that Plutarco Vallejo then platted the 23 town lots. And that came to life within a year. There was a Niles Hotel, a general store. Within 3 years, there was a post office in William Snyder's store. There's Snyder's post office. In 1884, then the new town, which is the one that's contract and finance bought on the west side of the track, was platted and recorded. And that you see is what this building picture was taken when it was moved from Vallejo Street onto Front Street on the west side. And from that then came the ascendance of agriculture in Washington Township. But what about the Chinese builders? Well, 2 months after the birth of Niles, the July 1870 Washington Township census recorded, and you have to look carefully at these names here, 36 Chinese railroad laborers, as they call them then, in the post office of Centerville, which then included Vallejo, Mills, and Niles. As you recall, the post office in Niles didn't come to be until 1873. And the ages of the Chinese builders were from 18 to 70. Some of them may have worked on the San Jose cutoff or the new main line under Strobridge. They may be the Pearl River Delta grandfathers of Niles. We don't know at this point, but here's some candidates for that. So to summarize the birth of Niles, I'll just go through this one chart. First, in September of '66, the Cox gang constructed this part. Then in 3 years later, Strobridge then constructed this part. In October of that same year, 1869, this cutoff here was graded, and then that set off in November the platting of this part here and the purchase of this land over here. And in December or earlier, and then this was renamed Niles as the railroad station. And then in April 28th of 1870, then this junction became alive, was called Niles, and Niles then sprang to life. And so Niles was born. So that's the end of my talk. Any questions? May I have the lights here so that we can.
Was Niles resident and a judge in Niles.
He was a judge in Nevada County, which is up in the foothills.
I know where Nevada County is.
Yes.
I thought he was a judge in the Niles area.
Not that I know of.
He was a judge for the he was originally a lawyer for the railroad.
He was an attorney for the Central Pacific. That is correct.
And I think at the time they named the station after him, he was still working for the Central Pacific.
But he was a judge in Nevada County at that time. Yes.
Nevada City.
Right.
We found his.
Good.
We were very surprised walking, my husband and I.
Oh, great.
And we just walked past this little cemetery, and there it was, this big, huge sign.
What I have not found is any primary document that said Central Pacific named it for him. I have not seen that. I'm sure it's somewhere in the museum somewhere, but I have not seen any primary documents. It's all secondary information I have about Niles. And so that's one little hole in the story. But I'm glad to hear that you found the.
Right, we just saw the name Niles.
Mhm.
And I thought it said something about the town of Niles, but I couldn't be positive about it.
Yes. Well, he did not live to see the contract and finance side grow. He only lived to see the Vallejo Street side grow. Because he passed away in 1890, I believe, something like that. And 1890, the west side was just starting to come to be.
We have an online question.
Yes.
What happened to the Chinese laborers after 1870s?
Well, as you saw in the census, some of the Chinese builders stayed around in the area. A lot of them went and found jobs doing other things. Among them are in the farms. Most of the farms had Chinese workers there. The vineyards, most of the Napa Valley, the large vineyards were dug by the Chinese, the sellers, the underground things there. The levees in the Delta area, they were also done by the Chinese, and so most of the labor work the Chinese went into. I don't know what Al?
Yeah, I heard that one of the reasons they hired the Chinese was because they were familiar with black powder and they could dynamite, or they thought they could dynamite the hills and level the ground easier because they were familiar with black powder.
Yes, black powder was used. I'm not sure whether that was the reason why the Chinese were hired. The Chinese were hired, I think, mainly because they were the ones that were willing to do the work. The first railroad to hire the Chinese was the California Central, which was building from Folsom up north towards Lincoln. Lincoln is a railroad town named not for Abraham Lincoln, but for Charles Lincoln Wilson, who was one of the contractors for that railroad. And the way that happened was that they hired the white workers, and once silver was found, it was during that time that the silver mines were just discovered. They all left, and so none of the white workers wanted to work for the railroad because it was disciplined work. It was not the kind of work that would get you rich overnight, and therefore the others just seem much more tempting. Yes.
What years?
What year was that?
Yeah.
Was 1858, I believe.
Just before the transcontinental.
Oh yeah, all this was before. There were lots before transcontinental. Stanford didn't do his first shovel until 1863, and that was just a ceremonial shoveling of the first dirt, because no railroad was constructed in 63 up in Sacramento. It was much later before they really got working up on that. But meanwhile, even the San Francisco to San Jose Railroad was hiring Chinese in 61. But before that, in 58, that's the earliest one that I know of. There may be earlier ones, but really it's hard to tell. It's hard to conceive of whether there could be any earlier one, because before that was the first railroad that was incorporated was the one from Sacramento to Folsom. And it was that one that they wanted to extend to Lincoln that the Chinese were hired. Yes, yeah.
I'd heard that the earliest part of the railroad that was just started in the Niles Canyon, and they ran out of workers, and they had hired a lot of Chinese workers for that. And then after the company went bankrupt, then Stanford and others moved them up into the Sierras to put it over the top so that they could connect to Promontory. I moved all the workers up there. Is that not true?
I think that's right. When the workers, when the Cox gang was abandoned and not paid, and we don't know whether they got paid at all or not, for the last 3 months of their work. You take 2,000 man months and divide by about 600 or 500 or many, then you get about 3 or 4 months worth of pay that was not given to them. They needed workers in the north, in the Sierras, and if you follow the Ryan gang, which I didn't talk much about, several times in 1869, they said we can't move as fast as we want to because Central Pacific has hired all the Chinese builders, and we can't get enough laborers here locally. And so the local situation was not priorities for Stanford. Stanford wanted to build the one across the Sierra first, and then do, well, it was after May that he finally put the resources to finish this last leg here. Yeah.
2 online questions. This is Anthony R. Rate reveal on the turntable location. 1, will the new turntable be located at the same, same location as the old historical? And also, did the Chinese grade the 1870 portion, the San Jose part as well?
Okay, I'll take the last part of the question is, did the Chinese grade to San Jose? Yes. They started in San Jose. So the Chinese graded in 1865, started in San Jose, and they entered. All that was finished grading, I would say, by probably June of 65. They probably had most of the valley from San Jose to the canyon graded. And the exception is that there was one bridge across the Coyote Creek near San Jose that they had to build a bridge on, and that took quite some time to get that done. And so they spent a good 16 months, I think, in the canyon. And so just those 3 miles in the canyon took an inordinate amount of time because it was such I didn't show many pictures of the grading that needs to be done in the canyon. There's some pictures from about 1867 that we think was taken, and that will show you how rugged the canyon was when the Chinese first entered the canyon in 1865. Now, when we go there, it's sort of covered with a lot of vegetation, and you don't see how rugged it was. The other part of the question is of the turntable. The turntable that I showed was the turntable as of 1870. Well, that picture is from the 1878 atlas of Thompson and West that I used that. And it was probably then goes back to the original 18 whatever it was that they built that. I don't know the date. The new turntable that we're talking about, or the roundhouse that we're talking about, is a roundhouse that Niles Canyon Railway is getting from Santa Clara, I believe. And I don't know where they're going to place it. I know that Randolph Ruiz is probably one of them fellows that would have that information as to where that might be. I'm not working on that. That's a contemporary issue as to where that might be placed. Maybe someone here has some information.
Okay, good. No, I got two more questions from online. This is from Debbie. Where do the laborers live during the construction of the Nile Railroad?
Okay, the question is, where did the construction workers live during the Niles Railroad? There's one Chinese camp that was identified. It's identified in mile marker 32.7, I think. And in relation to the pictures that you saw, remember there was this picture of the railroad rounding the corner and with people looking at the retaining wall that the Chinese built. They were looking at that, okay? And that's roughly about 32.8 or a tenth of a mile further upstream. So a tenth of a mile further downstream from that is identified a China camp. Now, I think, this is my own personal, that there must be other China camps in the canyon, because we're talking about 600 or 500, 600 men that had to be fed and housed. And the Chinese would live in tents. The whites usually have shanties that they built from wood and had roofs over them, hardwoods, you might say. The phrase "the white tents of the Chinese builders" was used as a way of identifying where the Chinese were in the North Bay area. That was one phrase I saw in the newspaper. And so they live there in the canyon by the creek.
Another question from Anthony R. Do you know which gang was in Newark in 1875 for the Dumbarton Point?
The question is, which gang was in Newark for Dumbarton Point? Well, it wasn't any of the gangs that I was talking about. It would be a new one. That is a narrow gauge railroad, if I remember correctly, that went through Newark. That's the South Coast.
South Pacific Coast.
That's right. Thank you. South Pacific Coast Railroad. And that was a narrow gauge that went down to Santa Cruz, I believe. So that going through San Jose, then to Santa Cruz, something like that. No more questions online. Oh, there's some more questions here. Yes.
These Chinese people brought here from China for that specific job, or were they already here?
That's a good question. The question is, were the Chinese brought here or not? The ones for Central Pacific, they estimates range from 12,000 to 20,000 workers. And with that large number, they actually went recruiting. They actually sent contractors to the Pearl River Delta to recruit. Usually when people say the Chinese, they don't think of the fact that it's all coming from just one small area of China. I mean, this is not China as a country, but we're talking about, it's sort of like talking about the United States and everyone coming from the Mississippi Delta, all right? And that's the region that you're getting the workers from. And those are the Americans that are working somewhere else. And it's nothing like talking about the rest of America. And so that's something which seems to be lost in the translation, I find, literally. I find that in most texts, they like to use Mandarin, for example, which is nice because that's the way you communicate with people nowadays, but yet they lose the fact that these were not Mandarin speaking people. There weren't even Cantonese speaking people. There were village Cantonese speaking people speaking in tongues which I can't understand. It's called Layip. And I understand that, but there's portions of it which was so strange when I was growing up in Chinatown that you know, it's just, you have to get an interpreter. Anyway, back to the question, were they brought over? Well, some were, not most, some were also sent. And this is a hard concept for a lot of people to understand. I know my father was sent, and he was like the video that you didn't see, left Hoi Ping, the same province district that Lim Le Hong left in 1855. My father left that same district when he was age 12 as well. So a lot of families send their sons. They pick the son that they think might be the one that would do best. Yes, the best. Yes, because the family was struggling, and so this was their way of making it. But that's not saying that all was like that, and some were then obviously were enticed by Central Pacific to come under whatever contract that Central Pacific was able to provide them. Was another question?
Yeah, that spot map that you show on the alert map, have you ever found an original for that spot map?
Yes, I found original for the questions about the alert map. The Yale Library, Yale University Library, gave me a digital copy of that map.
Alert or that specific plat map?
Oh, the plat map. No, alert. Just the alert map. Yeah. So I have the 4 sheets of alert map,
Right.
but unfortunately, I don't know how to do the magnifying digitally to get to the resolution that I would like to have when I blow it up. And so it is marginally better than the pictures I've taken here. So the ones you see on the screen is from the pictures either Janet took or I took. I'm not sure whether I took the one that Janet gave me or the one that I got in my camera. I can't remember which version I used for the slides. But it's not the one from Yale. The one from Yale is colored, so that's one thing nice about it. The colors do come through. You can see the districts. Centerville has a different color from, Washington Corner and things like that. So that's nice.
This one came from the county office, and the county office got it from Bancroft.
Oh,
And all they had done was see a black and white copy of the alert map.
Another online question from Debbie. How did the laborers send money back home when they got paid?
how did the question is, how did the laborers send their money when they got paid? I'm not sure back then how they did it, but I've heard stories. First of all, they were paid in gold coins. They were not paid they were paid in gold, not in currency, whatever the currency was. And I do know that there are stories documented that they would take the gold home physically. That is, they would take another boat back to China and take the gold. And usually the gold is sewn onto the clothing and things like that. And that was the way they would carry it. This is where the Chinese Six Company will come in to the discussion. The Chinese Six Company, first of all, is not a company. That's the Western translation of it. It is more like a association. It's more like a district association. It's more like let's say that we all were struggling and we need to go to Australia because Australia is rich and we're poor. And so Alameda County then sends some people over. Costa County sends some people over. And there will be an Alameda Association. There will be a Contra Costa Association. So it's an association of where you came from. And those were the associations, 6 of them then formed a sort of federation. And this was done in the 1850s in San Francisco. And they were in place because, well, one of the first, I want to backtrack a little bit more. In the 49ers, when the Chinese 49ers came, and there were several hundreds of them that came in 49, they met in a cafe on Jackson Street. I think the Canton restaurant, and they sought out a Western council. I think his name is Worthington or something like that. I may have it wrong. But what it showed me was that even then in 49, the Chinese knew that they needed protection because the environment was hostile. It was hostile, you might say, right from the beginning. And they wanted this council to, and it's all written out in the Daily Alta California, you know, what they wanted protection for and so forth, or translation for and things like that. So from there, then it was natural that the Chinese would want to have their own association for mutual protection as well as for caring for one another. And one of the things they did was to provide some housing for people who just came in from China, from the Pearl River Delta, I should say more particularly. And of course, they came from the same village, some came from the same county, and immediately there's some rapport because when you're in a strange country, then you say, Al, you're from Alameda. I'm from Alameda too. Hey, so all of a sudden we're old friends, even though we may not know each other when we're here, but we certainly know each other when we're over there. So that's how these associations formed. That's how the Sixth Company came, and the Sixth Company was in charge of making sure that the Chinese were able to bury the dead back in China if they wanted to. And so they would then see to it that the remains would be sent back to China. And they had a way of getting remittance. Back to the question was about remittances. How did they get the money back? And I think that through that, they had some means of doing that, which I don't know. I haven't seen the documentation for it, but I'm guessing, given all these other things that I do know. Other questions? These are great questions you got. I see a hand there. Oh, awesome, Janet. Sorry, I can't see you.
You once told me how long it took to get from China to California versus the East Coast.
Yes,
California, and then also from China to California via junk or via one of the steamers or whatever they.
yes, yes.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
thought that was eye-opening.
Well, before the Transcontinental Railroad, the California shores were closer to Canton than to the eastern shore of the United States. And that's because from the eastern shore of the United States, you had three ways of coming. You either go around the Big Horn, the Cape Horn, I should say, or you go to Panama or somewhere in the Central America and get across by land to the other side and catch another one to come up the Pacific. Or the third way is to go through the plains. And each one of those would take about the same time, 6 months. Whereas from Canton to California shores, if the wind was blowing right and you were in a large boat, you would make it in 3 months. In the junk, it will take longer because the junks gets caught in these doldrums more than the big ships, because the big ships will have enough sail power to sort of get out of it and get into the westerlies once again. And the video I didn't show you. Actually, I can show you the video without going through Zoom, and you can see it in person later. He took 6 months because he got caught in one of those doldrums. Pardon.
Got another online question. Can we see the mile marker 32.8 wall they built again?
Say it again, sorry.
Can we see the mile marker 32.8 wall they built again?
Oh,
The picture. Picture here.
I think he wants to go back and look at the picture.
oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, let me see if I can get out of this. And
And that wall is still there, right?
yes, it's still there. It's covered with vegetation and landfill.
Has anyone checked since the all of our floods?
Let me see, how did I get this big now?
Double click on it, we'll go to slideshow mode or.
Okay. So that's the picture that's 32.8. So someone knows something about this. I don't think I showed that it was 32.8 on this slide, but that is correct. Actually, someone tells me that this is 32.75. But this retaining wall, the size of this tile tells me that this is about 12 feet right here for a car, train car. So you can see this is a good 15, maybe 20 feet. I don't know. But anyway, if you were down the bottom there, it would be way over your head.
That's the creek down below.
The creek is somewhere down here, yes. The
Another
creek.
question on more of a statement, but I'm assuming only Chinese men were here and no women or children.
There were women and some children, but there were few. The workers were all Chinese men. That's for sure. I don't think there's any Mulan in this in this crew.
There were some shop owners in Alvarado that had families.
Yes.
And I can't remember the year that the first baby born in Alameda County, at 18, it was before, oh gosh, I have to look that up.
Talking about the Tallweather family? Was the first,
No, it's first Chinese baby.
oh, okay.
An American-born Chinese, that's what,
I'll look that up. I'll post it on.
I think the 1880 census of Alvarado did list some Chinese families. And also, I think it listed a house of ill repute in Chinatown also, which were first ladies.
right. And that's another one of the sort of inequities of the way things are reported. The ratio of house of ill repute amongst the Chinese and the ratio of house of ill reputes among the whites are not that different. But the ones among the Chinese are the ones that are reported more than the ones amongst the whites. And so that's one of the things I remember. Well, let me just give you one example. I was working on this years ago. I was working on a Wikipedia article on San Francisco Chinatown. I was appalled that the only thing that mentioned about San Francisco Chinatown was a toy, who was a prostitute, and because people wanted that, whoever was putting it in thought that that was the most significant thing about Chinatown, and so I had to sort of go in there and start putting in all the rest of the stuff that was in Chinatown. It's not to say that the prostitution wasn't there, but it's that it needs to be in context, and the rest of the context usually is not there when you read about these things. Certainly, if you read the old papers, it's really horrible reading when they talk about the Chinese.
When did the Chinese start being in San Francisco? When did Chinatown start be born?
Chinatown grew up at the same time as San Francisco did, because the Chinese 49ers came in 49, and San Francisco did not have their first mayor until 50, because before that California wasn't a state, and I guess they had well, John Gary, he was a 49er too, I think. He came shortly before. Let's see, what was he? He was one of these. He had a good position, and I can't remember. It'll come back to me. Anyway, as far as Chinatown is concerned, it started off on Sacramento. With some Chinese stores in between Kearny and DuPont Street, which is now Grant Avenue. If you go to Chinatown, you will see a sign on Sacramento Street, and the sign does not say Sacramento. The sign says Chinese Street. It's Tongyan Gai. It's the Tang Dynasty People Street, and so that's a self-referential name that the Chinese gave to themselves, that they're the Tang people. They're not. They want to go back to the golden age of China, you might say. Yes.
Weren't there some Chinese that were burned out of Monterey? And that
Yes.
And what year was that? Was that before the 1850s? And did they then come to San Francisco to settle, or did they go all straight up the railroad, or what?
Boy, I wish Jerry was here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I'm sorry, I'm not a good person to ask about Monterey, because I have deferred all those things to her, because she knows them. She knew them well. So I don't think that the burning was in the 49 or 50 or anything like that. It was much later. I'm pretty sure of that, but I don't know what year it was the the vicious years are the 70s. I mean, that was when the lynching in Los Angeles occurred. The 70s and the 80s. In the 80s was the massacre in Rock Springs, Wyoming, and
That was after all the Chinese had no longer had a railroad to work on, so they were doing white men's work, wasn't it?
yeah, you could say that, I guess. I don't know.
So, Lucy Shin in the 1870s, she talked about how they had to stay awake all night because, a lot of people's barns were being burned if they hired Chinese workers, and the Shins had Chinese workers starting in the 1870s. So in our area, this kind of stuff was going on too.
Mhm.
And I found out, so the first, as far as I know, the first American-born Chinese person is Wong and he was born in 1863 in Alvarado. And Tim, you gave me this website. This is the Frederick B website that you passed on to me years ago before we did our Chinese roots exhibit. So Frederick B had, I think he was a lawyer, had other lawyers who defended people who were trying to come back into the United States, because this young man went home and then he tried to come back in and he had to prove that he was an American born Chinese. So anyways, there's two young men who came back who were defended, and their whole life is set out on this website. So
Yeah.
I'll post this on the
Thank you.
museum. No, Angel Island was much later.
1910 was Angel Island, so yeah. But Alvarado also went on record that they did not want Chinatown there. I remember reading that.
Didn't the California nursery have a lot of Chinese working there?
Yes, they
Yes,
did.
they did.
Yeah.
People live there, in fact.
Yeah. I volunteer at the California nursery too, and they had very respected orchard managers from China, and we just recently met the descendants. I actually worked at IBM with one of the descendants of Bing Hong Chan, who was the manager in the 1930s. It's kind of odd how we both ended up standing at the California Nursery Historical Park and discovering this fact that her great grandpa actually was the manager there for some time. The Shins had lots of Chinese workers, up to 60 during the season, and maybe more. Lots and lots. You look at the censuses, the sugar factories, the salt factories, all over our county.
Mhm. The sugar factory in Union City, yes.
Freckles.
Uh-huh.
Actually, so local sugar factory was the Holly Sugar Factory. Originally it was the Dyer family. And the story is that the millwright factory was white. A lot of the workers were Asian, not speaking the same language. There's a lot of, let me show you how to do something physically. And then the Chinese worker go, oh, okay, he understood how to do it now. And they also were told that anything happens, you go find the millwright. Something starts to go bad, just go find that guy and let him know. So, but there was a language issue, but I think also something about some of them might have lived on site also.
Yes, there were.
Mhm.
Yeah, the standpoint match.
Okay.
So quarters.
So we've got some cooling ponds at one side of the railroad.
Right. The importance of language, if we look at the video of Lim Hong, he spoke English, and he was hired immediately as a go-in between, and so the ones who could speak English were elevated very promptly, you might say. Are there any other questions? Yes, Lena.
Not a question.
someone was just wondering what happened to the victim from the mysterious fire set off in the, what is it, Monterey area?
Yeah,
A percentage of them were invited to go work in San Rafael, and then there's a China camp there. They
that's
became
right.
shrimpers.
Okay,
And I met this gentleman, McNeil, and his daughter is very active in Rotary work.
mhm,
And so my grandfather actually invited them and gave them land and at a fraction of the cost, of course, it's
mhm.
more humanitarian way. And then they settled down to become shrimpers. And then they set up their households. And that's what we know as the China camp in San Rafael.
Yeah, the China camp in San Rafael is a shrimp,
They're shrimpers.
shrimper, and is a Kwan family that was the last one that was operating it, I guess. And also I found out that San Rafael had a public hanging of the Chinese, which I didn't know about until I went over there and looked at it, and that was shocking to me.
I think there might actually been one in Alville, off the bridge there on the creek. I'll have to go back. Something about a report of somebody hanging out there. And then took them a couple of days to take the person down.
Oh my.
Never
Uh-huh.
go back and look.
Okay.
One name I haven't heard mentioned is Charles McLaughlin. He got all the railroad land, and I'm wondering, was he like a general contractor above the Cox people, or?
Yes, Charles McLaughlin, that's a story in itself, you might say, and Cox, turns out. Cox sued McLaughlin. And so that's one reason why I'm not sure the Cox gang ever got paid, because he didn't have much money. And he was trying to get money from McLaughlin. So the way the hierarchy was that Western Pacific hired McLaughlin and Houston, I think it was, and then Houston left or something. I don't know what happened to him. But anyway, McLaughlin was the only one. And McLaughlin then hired Jerome Cox. Jerome Cox was a captain in the Civil War and in Indiana, I believe, and had some heroics there and was well respected. But then when he ran into trouble with McLaughlin, when he stopped the work in September 30th, he filed suit against McLaughlin. And then, as it turns out, they got into an argument about, well, Alan Frank is the one to tell the story. They got in the argument about 20 years later, and Jerome Cox shot McLaughlin dead. And then he was acquitted, even though he said, I shot him. He was acquitted because he shot in self-defense, because everyone hated McLaughlin, I guess. As I said, this is another story to you have to look into to get, the truth out of it. You get such conflicting things. And then finally, the suit was settled after McLaughlin's death. The state settled and awarded it to Cox. And this is when Cox was, pretty old and near his own death as well. So he got some money then, but by that time, I don't know whether that was useful or not. I doubt it.
One more, hold the last online question. Do you have any resources about the Chinese during this time period? Very a lot. Do you have any better, good, any key resources? So you can go look up a book or two.
The question is whether you have any key sources and look up a book or two. I can recommend some. A recent book by May Nai, that's the way you pronounce his name, NGAI, on the Chinese question. That's one of the few books that talks about the early Chinese in Chinatown. She was the one that I got some information about the 49ers, as well as the people who came in the 50s and so forth. That's a good text. If you want to see about the going back to Guangdong, then I think Gordon Chang's book on Ghosts of the Gold Mountain might be a useful text to look at. But my reading has mainly been from the newspapers.
Question: during this period of time, did any Chinese achieve leadership status?
A question that came right through here.
Yeah.
During this time, yeah, I heard it.
Okay.
Did any Chinese achieve leadership status? Well, I don't know what you mean by leadership status. The closest one I can think of are the ones that Strobridge hosted in his railroad car at on May 10th in Promontory Summit. Those were the foremen that he toasted, and so that's the one sort of celebratory thing that the Chinese had during that time period that is of note, I would say. Whether during that time period any had leadership, that's a good question. I have to think about that one.
Was the Chinese Exclusion Act about 1890 that prevented any further workers from coming in?
The Chinese Exclusion Act was a question, and it's at 1882 was when the Chinese Exclusion Act came to be. And it was an Exclusion Act for 10 years, and then it was renewed again in 1892. And then was made permanent somewhere in between there. I don't know when it was. I haven't followed that because it's not the kind of history I enjoy looking at. The Chinese Exclusion Act was more than excluding people from coming to the United States. It excluded them, anyone of Chinese, from participating in America, you might say. You cannot be naturalized, for example. And it has all kinds of, there were all kinds of sort of private covenants that were also spawned from that era. Real estate covenants, which were the thing that really kept the Chinese in Chinatowns. When they wanted to get the Chinese out of Chinatown, it turns out that there was no place for the Chinese to go because of these private covenants that says no one but Caucasians should occupy this, property, or no Mongolian could, be here, or other kinds of phrases like that. And that wasn't struck down into in the 20th century. And that's when we moved out of Chinatown, when it was struck down.
I have one more thing to say. It's Victor's paper is on the museum's website. So you can find that by just searching for Victor. And also, if you have questions about Chinese history in the area, our little group, you can contact us at, I think it's chinesehistory.museum.org or something. You can find it on the museum's website. So if anyone has questions or wants to join us, just give us a call.
And if anyone have questions online, you can always get me at vkw@umich.edu.
Thank you. And this has been recorded, so we have it available if someone wants to go back and review it or share it with others. And so I think we're running to the end of our recording authorization with Zoom. So I've been told we need to bring the meeting